Okay, here's an example of something we didn't talk about in class, so I want to do it here in this video. Notice, first of all, this is negative, all right? That coefficient's negative, and we really don't want that to happen because it kind of can deceive you as far as what's really happening with a graph. And so if you remember, as far as sine functions and cosines, even and odd, then you would remember that if you have this, sine is an odd function, and so you can pull out that negative. So we always want this to be positive. And so again, kind of like in algebra, when you have something like this and you want that coefficient to be positive, you can factor out that negative. Or if this is negative and you want this to be positive, you can factor out that and have something of equal value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a negative out of both of these, and then I'm going to use the fact that sine is an odd function to pull that out front. So in reality, what we are really graphing is that function right there. All right, so again, if this is a negative coefficient, you're going to want to factor it out, and then if it's cosine, then instead of pulling it out, it just can kind of disappear because, again, cosine is an even function. But if it's sine and you can take that negative, then you can take it out. All right, so there's what I have. And so what I'm going to do is figure out how to graph this thing. Now, I could find the period, the amplitude, all that stuff. Amplitude would be the absolute value of 3. Vertical shift is -4, so that'd be down 4. There's a phase shift here. We could either set that to 0 to solve, or we can do our little in-between thing to figure that out. Domain, -infinity to infinity. The range, instead of -1, 1, we could multiply by 3, and again, absolute value. So that'd be what, -3, 3, and then we could do the shift on that. So we could figure that out. So there's lots of things we can do here, but we're going to graph it, so we'll figure some of that stuff out as we go. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and put my angle, which again, sine, cosine, tangent eat up angles, and then they spit out a ratio, and then the ratio is going to get multiplied by a -3 and then -4. So my angle is all of this, and I'm going to shove it in between that pi. All right, so this is kind of like your theta, except your theta has some stuff that has been done to it. All right, so I'm going to subtract both sides by, or sorry, all three sides by -pi/2. So -pi/2, this guy. And then over here you need to know how to do fractions, so put a 1 under that. Get a common denominator of 2. So 4 pi minus pi is what? 3 pi over 2. Now at this point I want to go ahead and cancel this, so I'm going to multiply by 4 over pi, again on everything to keep it all even. So again, our goal is to get just x. And let's see, our pi's cancel, and that goes in there too, so we get 5, and our pi's cancel, and this is 2, but now don't lose that negative in there. It's kind of hidden. All right. So, oops, did sorry, I wrote 5. We are multiplying over there, so that should be 6. All right, so now I know my start, and again, notice that if you set this equals 0, this will be the same thing as your phase shift, because normally you would start at 0, and now we're starting at -2 instead, so obviously something had to happen to make that happen. So that is our phase shift, and again, you could have just set either one of these to 0, actually will work for that. All right, so now we want to figure out our unit, right? All right, so again, what you do to your unit is normally we would have, like, if our period was 2 pi, we would divide it by 4 and go by pi/2s. All right, but the problem is we don't know what our period is, so we can't really divide it by 4. So first we better figure out our period. And so if you take 2 pi, and again, go to that coefficient right there and divide it by pi/4. So you take 2 pi over 1 times the reciprocal, and you get 8. So a lot of times your period will have, you know, pi's and things like that in it. But this time, because of pi's over here, you're actually going to get a period of 8. So it could be like 8 seconds or something like that. I mean, your period doesn't always have to pi in it. So now my unit is kind of nice for those of you that hate fractions, because 8 is what the period is, and we're just going to split it into 4. So our period is actually 2. Or not our period, sorry, our unit is actually 2. So we know how to make our x-axis now. All right, so just going to go ahead like this. So here's -2, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and we could do 10, and again we could do a few more over this way. All right, so that's pretty good. All right, so now as far as figuring out your y values, we can go back and kind of look at what the range would be. Again, it would have been what, -1 to 1, but then the 3, and again just the amplitude would make that what, -3, 3. We don't worry about the sign with amplitude. And then we have this -4 that's going to shift it. So -7 and what, -1. All right, so as far as down here goes, oh, come on, don't want to go that far. Okay, so, oh, I guess that's not too far away. -7, -1 is where we're dealing with. So here's -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, and -7. All right, so if you notice, -7 is going to be the low. -1 is actually going to be the high. So the mid would be halfway between there. So there's a distance of 6 there. So let's see, 3, 1, 2, 3. That would be at a -4. The other way to get that would be to average them. If you take a -7 plus a -1, that's a -8. Divide by 2. The distance in the middle, which would be the midpoint, is a -4. All right, so then the last thing we need to look at is what are we actually graphing here? So we're graphing a sine function, but notice there really was a negative there. Once we did the factoring, we could figure that out. So normal sine would go like this, but because of the negative, we know it's going to flip. So it's actually going to start mid, low, mid, high, mid. All right, so I'm going to come down here. So I know instead of being normal, it's going to be flipped. So it's going to be mid, low, mid, high, mid. All right. So let me start at my starting point, which is at, excuse me, at a -2. And at -2, then it's going to be what? It is going to be mid. So my mid is -4. And then it's going to go down to low. And my low is off the screen a little bit, but my low is at a -7. And then it's going to go back to mid at 2, because that's my next unit. Because again, this is my start unit. These are my 5 consecutive units to get my 5 key points. All right, so there's that. So I go mid, low, mid, and then I'm going to be high, which my high is at a -1. And then I'm going to go back to mid. So I kind of have the shape of my graph right there. All right, and then I could keep going. So, you know, I can be like, okay, well, then this is going to go low, and this is going to go here to kind of keep going with my graph. And then I could look and say, okay, well, this one's going to go up here, and it's going to go back to mid right there. So again, kind of get a general shape of part of the graph anyway. All right, hopefully that helps you with that one. And again, we can do some more in class as well. But I thought I'd shoot this out there just because of that negative coefficient. It's kind of a little different scenario than what we've talked about in the past.